You are watching or listening to Purham and Associates. For more information, go to rpurham.com or follow me on all social media platforms and subscribe at RPURHAM. Thanks, and see you over there. Hey, good day to you all. Welcome to Purham and Associates. I'm your host, Randy Purham. Hey, I hope y'all had a fantastic week and enjoying the government shutdown. Hey, we got there's gonna be some good stuff today. I got a very special guest with us. Y'all know who he is by now. We got none other than Mark Mix. He is the president of the committee and foundation of the Right to Work Committee. Has been there since 2003. Excuse me. Under the leadership of Mr. Mix, the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation has continued to provide unparalleled free legal assistance to workers and has utilized cutting-edge legal strategies to protect workers from the abuses of compulsory unionism. Mr. Mix frequently appears on national television shows including Fox News Channel, Your World with Neil Cavuto and Glenn Beck, and Fox and Friends, and has also appeared multiple times on CNBC and CNN. Mr. Mix also serves as a guest on nationally syndicated radio shows such as the Lars Larson Show, Jason Lewis Show, Michael Reagan Show, and the Jim Bohannon Show. Similarly, Mr. Mix's writings have appeared in national outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, Investors Business Daily, Washington Examiner, and National Review. His pieces have also been featured in widely read regional publications across the country, including Detroit Free Press, the Orange County Register, and the Detroit News. Mr. Mix is also a sought-after speaker on political technology and grassroots lobbying tactics. He often travels across the country speaking and training participants in the political process. Mark Mix holds a bachelor's in finance from James Madison University and an associate's degree in marketing from the State University of New York. Prior to joining the National Right to Work Committee in 1990, Mr. Mix worked for several state-level right-to-work groups. He joined the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation in 1999. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing the summit, presenting to others, Mr. Mark Mix. I get one of those things that got like the in the background.
I don't know who that guy is you're talking about, Randy. I don't know who that guy is.
Nah,
anyway,
that's you.
It's good to be with you.
Yes, absolutely. It's good to see you again. How's things been going in your neck of the woods?
Well, as you might guess, Randy, we're really busy. There's a lot going on in Washington. Well, actually, there's not much going on in Washington, D.C. right now, and that's not a bad thing for America.
Right.
But from a litigation standpoint, as you and I have talked about in the past, there's lots of government union activity as it relates to the federal government. And so we've got a lot of work going on there. We've got a lot of work going on for graduate students in the higher education system across the country. And so our legal work is, we've been very, very busy for the last couple of months since the last time you and I spoke.
Yeah, I want to touch on the government aspect of the unions here in a second. But I want to get your take on with the government shutdown and how things are affecting the people that you represent, the different organizations that you represent. Is there any correlation there, or is it kind of like a separate thing?
Yeah, we've got some cases on behalf of federal workers. Obviously, those cases continue. The court system's open. I will tell you the traffic's a little better right now, which is good. It's easier to get to work here in Northern Virginia, as the government employees are at home at this point. But no, from a standpoint of immediate impact on our work, the court systems are still operating. There's the Department of Labor is they've got non-essential employees off, but that really doesn't affect the litigation work and the lobbying work that we do at the committee and foundation. Obviously, Congress is in session. They're trying to get a continuing resolution hammered out that gets the government back going again. We're not, immediately involved in that or directly involved with it, but we're keeping our eye on all the stuff that's happening. That's for sure.
Right. And that was kind of like what I've been thinking about these last few days is whereas with the government shutdown, there are some entities that are open, some are closed, some are at minimal manning, some are at no manning. So I can imagine the traffic is wonderful right now because I live in the DMV footprint and going to DC at 4 a.m. where it's 45 minutes versus 8 a.m. where it's 4 hours to get into the Beltway. I can imagine. So, but I want to ask you: has there been with federal workers that are under union contracts? That's a tongue twister. Under union contracts, have they been like giving you a phone call saying, "Hey, we're potentially about to be laid off here or fired. What can you do?" type of thing. Has that been coming to the surface?
Yeah, we actually, Randy, we've got a couple of cases on behalf of federal employees that are kind of unrelated to what's going on right now with the shutdown, but it's certainly related to what's going on with the Trump administration's desire and attempt to basically reduce the power of government unions when it comes to federal executive branch employees. We are fairly focused on the issue of compulsory unionism, and so the idea of someone saying, "Hey, we're getting furloughed or getting laid off." I mean, the union allegedly is supposed to represent them in those types of activities. The grievance process that's part and parcel of the bargaining system. Right. That would be the one person, the one group they would call. We do have employees that call us and ask questions about what may happen and what their rights may be, and we tend to advise them and give them free legal advice when it comes to those issues relating to the union and how the union's treating them, and of course how the employer's treating them too, if they're violating their rights vis-a-vis labor policy. So, yeah, I think the number of people that have been calling in just asking questions has probably increased. I've had a couple of conversations with people I know that are federal government employees that unrelated to kind of the union issue, but related to, hey, the layoffs and I was talking with a couple of folks about the people that accepted the buyouts that went into effect at the end of September 30th. That was like 157,000, I think, employees who took that buyout and not walked away from their job, which was something that Trump put out, back I think in March of earlier this year. So
yeah. Okay, talk to us about collective bargaining. What is that? What does that mean? I know some people know what it means, and I know some that don't. So explain to us what collective bargaining means.
Yeah, the idea of collective bargaining is that employees join together and they hire a union representative. Those are the people that do the negotiations and do the kind of representation of workers in the private sector and in the public sector. And they use that mechanism, that ability, and that right to basically amplify their voice in the workplace, to say, okay, look, the group of us want to get together and we want to have someone work out a contract or an agreement or working conditions that we'll live by. And we'll let the union do that. And the union's stock and trade, their product that they offer workers across the country, both in the private sector and in the public sector, is that, quote, representational, expertise, if you will, in basically going to the employer and saying, hey, this is what the employees want. If you want to have them continue working for you, you need to make an agreement with them. So that's the bargaining process. It's in the private sector. It's been around since the 1930s when Congress said, we're going to establish federal control over the private sector workforce, and we're going to allow unions to represent workers and have a system that allows unions to negotiate terms and conditions of employment in the private sector. In the public sector, Randy, it's a little bit newer, but it's more of a problem, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But it goes back to 1959 when Wisconsin was the first state to recognize that their government employees would be allowed to be represented by unions and negotiate terms and conditions of employment in the public sector. John F. Kennedy signs an executive order in 1962 that expands it dramatically to the federal workforce. 1978, Congress passes what's known as the Federal Labor Relations Act, which basically makes the bargaining structure in the federal government statutory. and allows a dramatic expansion of union power in the federal government. And of course, at the state level now, local level, basically the unions in America are about 50% private sector workers and 50% public sector workers. So they have a big role in the overall union movement. And primarily, that's the one that's growing, is the public sector model for government unionization and bargaining.
Okay. And thank you for that explanation, because it leads me into the next. I wanted to lay down a foundation so the audience will understand what we're about to talk about here, because the Trump administration, I guess, got involved here in their own little quirky way.
Indeed.
And said, they told the American Federal Government Employees Union to terminate their contract with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And so now that affects 30,000 workers. So by the dissolvement of this contractual relationship between AFGE and the FBOP, does that set the foundation, if you will, to mass fire folks that are in the prison system? And will this translate over to, let's say, the idea of mass firing other government agencies or employees in other government agencies once their contracts are terminated? I know there was a lot of questions in that.
No, Randy, I don't think so. I don't think the primary objective is to be able to fire people. I think what the primary objective is, if you go back to Trump's executive order back in March of this year, where he said, we're going to take a significant look at how the federal government's run, particularly under those employees under Article 2 of the Constitution. Randy, one of the things that we get in this constitutional republic is we get the chance to redress our government. And one of the ways we do that is through the election process. And right now, under Article 2 of the Constitution, the president is the only one under Article 2 that we get to hold accountable for the actions of the federal government. So if the Department of Labor, or the IRS, or the Social Security Administration are doing bad things, we can't diselect or throw out the head of the Social Security Administration. Only the president can do that. So with that in mind, as voters, we the people, get a chance to say to the president, we like the way you're running the executive branch, or we don't. And so we cast our vote for the president in that regard. He's the chief executive officer of the federal government administration under Article 2. What President Trump has said is that, look, if we're going to run the government, there's certain things that we want to do to run the government the way we want to. And one of the things that stops that is the dramatic monopoly power of the government unions. What we've got, Randy, basically, is we've got a private institution in between taxpayers and elected officials. It's really an interesting phenomenon when a private organization can get that type of power, and they can set the terms and conditions of employment for federal employees, and we really don't have anything to say about that except for casting our vote for a president who may give the unions too much power or try to take more power away. One way or the other doesn't really matter. So that's a really significant constitutional question when it comes to government sector unionization. And I'll take you back to the 1930s again, when Franklin Roosevelt was signing the bill that implemented federal government, federal government jurisdiction over private sector labor relations. He said, he was asked about this. He said, well, why don't we just unionize government employees too? He said, it's unthinkable that we would do that. It's not the same. In the private sector, you have substitute goods, and you know that if union officials hold out too long or ask for too much, then a substitute will come in and take over market share. Not true in government. By definition, we know the government does more than they should, but by definition, the government does necessary things that the private sector doesn't provide. And so if that's the case, then how do you grant a monopoly to union officials bargaining over terms and conditions of employment that cost us as taxpayers money, and then say we as electors or voters are outside that circle and they're sitting and negotiating with people they elect to office? So it's a significant question and a big difference.
It is, and I wrestle with the idea, and I'm glad you brought up FDR, because I was just going to mention how FDR he played a significant role in trying to. I would say he was trying to prevent the unionization of the federal government. I would say more so he expanded it, but he did it through the courts. So this is where we get the rogue judges and everything else coming into play. For those that are listening, don't know, look at Justice Frankfurter. He was kind of like the headway for that. But with that, the expansion, I see it as, a unionization of the federal employees under that apparatus. When it relates to Article 2, it should be deemed as unconstitutional because it does usurp the authority of the president to be able to dictate who works for him or not. Because you got a lot of these organizations that say that, oh, this is a private organization, this is a private entity of the government. It's like there's no such thing as a private or independent entity of the federal government, especially if you're under the executive. So I get people get confused, and I get confused as well. Although I know the government structure very well, but when you hear an independent agency under the executive, it's like there's no such thing because the president still appoints that person to run that agency. So in essence, they're not, independent. So I just wrestle with the idea of a government, any government employee or agency having a unionized structure. They should serve at the pleasure of the president, just like everybody else does. So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me just, because there's two parts to that question, yes. Randy. One is, do you let the employees organize in a union? And then secondly, once they're organized in a union, do you grant them the power, the executive exclusive power to negotiate terms and conditions of employment? The idea of unionizing government employees, I don't have a problem with them getting together and joining an organization to redress government. I mean, here in Virginia, up until 3 years ago now, we had a prohibition against the government recognizing the union when it came to negotiating terms and conditions of employment. That didn't stop any union from going to Richmond, Virginia, and advocating for their views with legislators. They could do that, and they did that in a very strong way. In fact, the Volunteer Firefighters Organization in Virginia is probably the strongest union in the Commonwealth. And, they didn't have the ability to force themselves into the negotiation. But when they went to Richmond, they were a political force. So the idea of unionizing government employees is one thing. The idea of recognizing them and giving them exclusive bargaining privileges over every worker and exclusive bargaining privileges to sit down with government officials and negotiate terms and conditions of employment, that's really the injustice right there. I mean, letting them join together voluntarily and having groups is perfectly fine, right? But giving them that power is the other part.
Yes, I agree there, and that's where I wrestle with is like what. Because so I guess because of, in the news lately, you're seeing these federal employees that are fired by the Trump administration. They're suing because they're saying that they're wrongfully terminated, and it's like you serve. I'm going back to the fact of you're serving at the pleasure of the president. So how are you suing because he doesn't like you? So I have that wrapped around my mind, but I'm seeing judges side with these plaintiffs in that regard, saying, yeah, the president, you can't fire them. And it's like, huh? What system are we living in here? So that's why I get kind of like my mind gets boggled with that. And I also look at the military, for example. The military, we're like, I guess you could say, probably like the second largest employed workforce of the federal government. We didn't have, and not to my knowledge to this day, still don't have a union, to represent our interests. And I know there was plenty of days I fought with some commanders. and one,
I get it. Yeah.
So to see the way the civilian side of it work within the government, in terms of unionization, I agree with you. They should be able to band together voluntarily and say, hey, these are the issues that we're facing, let's address them. But to give exclusive power, once again, to an entity, then they say that they're an independent organization aside from the executive, although they're within the executive, is where I have a problem with. And I believe you have that same qualm as well. So how do we address that? What would it take to dissolve that relationship?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously there's 40 lawsuits, Randy, to your point, that have been filed, I think, as of the end of July from unions attacking this Trump, activity of trying to say, hey, we're going to form it. One of the things he's done is he's used executive branch power that basically says if a particular agency has a national security profile, then they can be exempted from the bargaining orders and the statutory, bargaining issues that relate to the federal employment. I think what he can do and what he's doing, and I think what the Supreme Court's going to be addressing, the issue of firing employees of independent agencies is going to be a ripe issue, probably in front of the U.S. Supreme Court very, very quickly. I think there's going to be oral arguments in a case relating to that issue you bring up in December. A case with the Federal Trade Commission, an employee named Cook, that the president said, look, I don't agree with you. You need to leave. And he did that, and it's going to end up in the U.S. Supreme Court. Again, I think a petition's already been granted for a December argument about that. And that, Randy, that's taken us all the way back to 1935 with a Supreme Court case called Humphrey's Executor, where the Supreme Court ruled that the president did not have the authority to fire a member of what then was the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, and because they were an independent agency and the president couldn't remove someone. So that's been the standard since 1935. It's been chipped away at in several instances, but that's going to come to the forefront. And to your point, that case will have a dramatic impact on how we manage this going forward. I think the way forward is this. Look, government employees can unionize, they can organize, they can mobilize, they can be active, but saying that they're going to be part and parcel of a negotiation about how a government runs is another question altogether. Giving them exclusive, as I use the word exclusive because that's the way it works, exclusive authority to negotiate with the government over terms and conditions of employment is just wrong. And several states don't do that. And the states that do, Randy, you won't be surprised that California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, those states that are in the greatest fiscal situations in their states are the states that are most heavily unionized and give union officials the power to basically dictate how government's going to be run. So eliminating that power is probably the solution. I say it sounds easy when I say it, but boy, oh boy, from the litigation standpoint that you're following, 40 lawsuits is going to take time. And the goal here, according to Liz Schuler, the president of the AFL-CIO, the short-term goal is to file all this litigation and then hope that it takes 4 years to get it out of the way, and then by then we'll have a new president. So that's kind of the strategy. But we can do it, but it takes political courage, and there's not a lot of that in Washington, D.C.
Very true. It's not. And I wanted to get your on that same wavelength there. I want to get your thoughts on the implementation. I'm not going to say it's an implementation, but a strategy, if you will, being extrapolated from Project 2025 in relation to the government shutdown. So the premise here is, now that the ball is in the president's court in terms of being able to fire or lay off or furlough half of the federal government, in a sense, this is a playbook piece out of Project 2025. And so Rust vote is like, excellent, let's execute. And so how would this, if this comes to fruition, and we say there are mass firings, mass layoffs, and what have you, of the various entities in the government, will these workers have the ability to redress these issues or that issue with your organization? Will you get flooded then saying, hey, our rights have been violated, we got this issue, we just been fired for no reason because of the government type of thing? Would that impact your work?
Well, it might. It very well might. I mean, depending on how the litigation's framed and how the firing's done, it's possible that workers would have an opportunity to call us. And again, Randy, if it fits into kind of the guardrails that we have for our mission, we're not an employment, we don't do employment law that is, focused on things that are outside of the issue of the relationship between union officials and the employees they claim to represent. That's really what we're up to. I think the unions will get flooded with calls, and they'll be filing grievances and they'll be doing the things that they would be doing through the structure that exists at this point. Because I think ultimately, until you get a solution or a settlement or a case decision from the courts, or you get action from the United States Congress on rolling back the power that union officials have, it's going to be a relevant question. I mean, obviously, we'll take any phone call of any worker that wants to call us. We'll listen to what they have to say and what the terms and what's going on with their situation. And if it fits our protocol, we'll help them for sure. Literally, we've helped employees that have sued their employer. We've helped employees that have sued their unions. We've been involved in cases where we've got a case right now on behalf of agricultural workers out in California that are going up against the Personnel Employee Relations Board out there. We've got a case in New York State on behalf of agricultural workers who are battling against the state PERB, which is granted union officials dramatic powers over these workers. So we've got a toe in the water in that area, but it depends on what the conditions are that led to kind of this layoff. If the president signs an executive order about it, we'll see. I'm sure there'll be plenty of lawyers and litigators on the union side that will be in court for another round of lawsuits for sure, as it relates to that type of behavior. I tell you what, Randy, I don't suspect that it's going to end up like the Democrats say it is likely to in this, mass firing. I think the president understands that the federal government has responsibilities. They have jurisdiction over lots of things that are important that help the country run.
Yeah.
I will say that I believe personally that the government is way bigger than it should be. It has to be. If we stuck to the enumerated powers in the Constitution, I don't know how big the government would be, but boy, oh boy. Maybe you got a thought on that, Randy.
I do actually, and that's where I kind of alluded to the idea of the unions having that layer in between, the voters and the executive, and that to me not only speaks to Article 2, but it also speaks to Article 1, because that will require some kind of regulatory guidance and what have you from the Congress. So that purview of unionization in the federal government does not fit under any articles of enumeration under the Article 1. So that's why I have my turmoil with that. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. I don't see how any of this, what we're talking about, what's going on, fits under any of the enumerated powers of Congress. And so, therefore, it would be deemed constitutional, whatever it does, birthed out of that. And so that goes back to being litigated and everything else. And then we got the Supreme Court that would say, oh, well, yeah, it's not constitutional per se, but necessary and proper. Right? And so now we get into that domain of what do we consider necessary and proper. And I know the audience is probably like, what in the hell is he talking about? But we have to dig into this stuff, and I have these conversations every day with people, and they just look at me. They said, I hope one day I hope you never get to the Supreme Court, because you will overcomplicate things. And I'm like, I would, because I'm very much a constitutionalist, and so I would look at it and say, okay, you got this law, great, Congress passed it, wonderful. Does it fall within the scope of Section 8? If it doesn't marry up anywhere in there, it's unconstitutional. Throw it out. Go back to the drawing board. That's how I would just look at things. It'd be just that cut and dry. And so I look at that as the same with any branch in the executive. It's like, are any of these branches, because once again it goes back to they have to get the appropriations, they have to get the laws and regulations from the Congress. If these branches or these departments, these divisions or what have you, agencies, if they're not within the scope of Article 1, then they should be deemed as unconstitutional. They should not exist. That's how I look at it, like the Department of Education. That's the easier one. Even the CDC, for that matter. It's like, what is the purpose of the CDC or the NIH? These are federal entities that are dictating the health and everything else, but where does that fall into the purview of Article 1, Section 8? And a lot of people look at me and say, well, that's dealing with, the public welfare. Is it? Is that really dealing with the public welfare? That's why the states exist. The states can deal with the public welfare in the regard of healthcare. So I can't run for president, and I can't run for Congress again, because I'll be in trouble. So, but I wouldn't. No.
You're articulating the positions that are right. I mean, we've litigated that stuff. We've litigated the constitutional First Amendment protections that flow out of the idea of forced unionism. I mean, if you go back and look at the history of labor policy in America, in the private side, the federal government's usurpation of the jurisdiction over federal state rights as it relates to labor policy and being experiments and innovations in policies. The Supreme Court actually ruled Roosevelt's first attempt to do this as unconstitutional. Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes and I think it was Roberts, Associate Justice Roberts, were the two independent voices between the Three Musketeers and the Four Horsemen during that period of the Supreme Court. And they switched their votes after Roosevelt threatened to pack the court. and add 6 new justices to the court to 15. As you know, Randy, the Article 3 doesn't stipulate how big the Supreme Court is. It's basically they said we're going to have a Supreme Court and Congress will set up inferior courts. And so, the idea of packing the courts is a legitimate threat to the integrity of the court. And so these 2 justices, Hughes and Roberts, both switched their votes on the second pass of this federal usurpation of labor relations from the states and said, oh, yeah, we think it's appropriate at that point. And that's how we got here. Yep. The Supreme Court did their job first, and then through pressure and leverage, basically backed off and capitulated to Roosevelt, and that's what got us here. But we've litigated this before, Randy, on exactly those grounds that you talk about. The idea of First Amendment. We won a Supreme Court case called Janus v. AFSCME in 2018, where the majority of the court said that when you force a government employee to pay a private organization to work for government, you're violating their speech rights, their First Amendment rights. We won that case finally. We've tried it. It took us 40 years to get from the initial case filed back in 1976, a case called Abood, through 4 or 5, I think it was 4 other cases that argued the same thing to get to the First Amendment. Right. And so that's what we're trying to get. And I appreciate your view on it because you're right. The federal government's got way out of control. We know it. We're living with it now. And it's something that the founders of this country knew was wrong, knew was going to be a problem, tried to protect us again with the 9th Amendment, the 10th Amendment. Yep. And, oh, boy, here we are.
Here we are. Exactly. Yes. It's interesting because to that case, that's the freedom of association under the First Amendment of expression. And so a lot of people confuse that. So, and they try to abuse that actually. They say, well, in order for us to affiliate with you, you have to abide by our terms and conditions of affiliating with who we affiliate with. So therefore, you have to be forced into this union if you want to affiliate with me. And so you get into this cabalic thing where you're like, I don't want to be a part of this union, although I want to work at this job, but I don't want to be a part of the union. Yep. And I faced that issue when I was back in high school. When I was working for this grocery store chain, and they had a union there, and being 17, I was just like, why do I got to pay this $30 every month to some people that I'm never going to get to talk to, this type of thing. I'm not even going to be here that long, I was like, no. They're like, well, you have to be part of it. All the employees in the store are part of it. It was this 97, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm just not. And so I subsequently quit that job. Because I was just, it was other issues going on. It was just the management of that place was ridiculous, and I see where we have the right to associate, and I understand that. But then once again, you peel back the layer, and that association has associations associated that you're forced to associate with, and so that I just don't see how we would ever escape that apparatus of being committed to something, and then over the next course of our time here, because it is a First Amendment issue, but to what extent, and I want to get your thoughts on this, but to what extent does the First Amendment become depleted or limited to a person's rights to associate?
Yeah, well, and that's a fundamental question about our litigation program. Just to go back to your grocery store experience, Randy, we every year around June, and in June, right at the beginning of July, we get a call from the parents of a young high school student that's working at a grocery store who gets their first paycheck, and it's zero. It's $0 because the union dues and initiation fee have been taken out, and they didn't work enough hours to actually have a positive paycheck. So anyway, But no,
I almost came across that issue too.
Yep. But look, the right to associate, you're exactly right. I mean, we have argued that again and again and again, and I think ultimately we will get to it. We will have to get to it because the idea that you can accept me forcing you to allow me to speak for you in your relationship with your employer, and then I get the ability to force you to pay for that. I mean, how it's just wrong. And so what we have to get to, Randy, is we have to get to state action. we finally got to state action in the Janus case, where we not only we had exacting scrutiny from the court because we were making a constitutional argument in the judicial review process. And when you get there, then you get to the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Oftentimes our litigation ends up with just reasonable review or whatever the lowest level of review is from a litigation standpoint, and you get to the individual case, but you don't get to the state action case. And in this case, that's exactly what's happened. The state is the catalyst for forcing you to associate with me. They're the ones that are doing this. They've made this exclusive bargaining privilege of the unions a function of their quote-unquote rights to force you to join my organization and pay for that usurpation of your associational rights. And we'll get there. We got there. We're almost there in the public sector fight. We'll get there in the private sector fight, too. I'm confident of it. I mean, the easiest thing is for Congress to go in and pass the bill that's currently pending in the House and the Senate. It's literally a one-page bill, Randy. One page. Not 5,300 pages. You don't have to pass it to know what's in it. It doesn't add a single word to federal law, not one word. It simply goes into that 1935 Roosevelt-era legislation, and it says the bias in the federal government will be in favor of voluntary unionism, not compulsion. Everyone will have the same rights, but you cannot compel Randy to, one, associate, and to, two, pay dues as a condition of getting to keep a job. One-page bill, doesn't add a single word to federal law. It's pending right now in the House and the Senate.
Okay.
That's how we fix it in the private sector.
Thank you for that, and I did not know that that existed. So, not to put you on the spot, but do you happen to know what bill number that is? Either on the
I'm going to say it is H.R. 1200 and Senate Bill 532. I will confirm that with you by email, Randy.
Okay.
I should know that right off the top of my head, but
no worries,
as you can see, my top of my head is slippery. I got a slippery top of my head, so yeah, I lose stuff every now and then. It just slips off there. Yeah.
No worries at all. No, I get it. I'm impressed.
Yeah, it's called the National Right to Work Act. Okay. Yeah, National Right to Work Act. Rand Paul is the sponsor in the Senate, and Joe Wilson in the House.
Okay. Paul and Wilson. Okay. Yeah. No worries. Trust me. This legislative session down here in Texas, it ended in June, and we had a special session. So the ability to track or even look at over, I would say it was like 6,000 bills that was filed, and being on the state level, Republican Party of Texas on the executive committee, and we're tracking and looking at these different bills, and to know any number, I'm impressed. Well,
thank you, Randy. I appreciate that you covered for me. I get
it. That's what I said. Not to put you on the spot, but if you happen to know it, that's great. But the title, that works even better. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can go and research that and encourage your legislators to co-sponsor, tag onto those bills and everything else, because the more co-sponsors that you have on a bill, the more likelihood it will pass. So I encourage everyone to do that. Mark, talk to us about nationalrighttowork.org, what people can do when they go to that website, if it applies to them and whatnot, and how they can support.
Yeah. Getting back to your question about what's happening, as the government employees situation changes and is flexible. We have two websites. The National Right to Work Committee is the legislative arm of our operation. That's where they can find out what legislation we're tracking in Congress and in the state legislatures. Like you, Randy, we track about 6,000 bills every legislative session at the state level, at the federal level, and we take action on 300 or 400 of them every year. So we try to keep track of what's going on there. That's the committee's website, nrtwc.org, if you want to know what's going on legislatively and get information about the right to work bill that I just mentioned. The other website is the foundation's website. That's our legal defense operation. We have 17 staff attorneys that provide free legal aid and free legal services to workers across the country. That website is nrtw.org, and that website has lots of information about your rights in the workplace vis-a-vis unionization and forced unionization. There is an 800 number there that you can call a lawyer and talk with them for free, lay out the situation you're facing and see if we can help you. Right now, we have about 260 active cases on behalf of employees across the country, helping them exercise their rights in the workplace. So that's nrtw.org for the litigation side, the foundation's website.
Awesome. Mark, I appreciate you as always. Love getting into the constitutional questionality of our conversations with these with the right to work and what your organization is doing for the people out there. Truly appreciate it. Be safe out there, and more than welcome to come back anytime when we got some hot button issues going on. I look forward to the discussion, and be safe out there.
Well, I do too, Randy, and thank you for the opportunity. It's a privilege to talk with you and to get to those issues that are bigger than just the issues of the day. These are issues about the future of the country, and that matters. That matters.
Absolutely. Be safe out there, and I'll talk to you soon. God bless.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Mix, a great conversation. I love getting into the Constitution like that, to the fidelity of what we can and can't do as both as citizens and as the government and the different organizations and whatnot. And as you can see now there are a lot of organizations that exist within the government that should not exist. So with Project 2025, everybody remember back when back to the elections, the run up to the election, everybody was like panicking about Project 2025. Oh my God, they're going to implement Project 2025. Oh, the world's on fire. You can see why. If you actually read it, it was like 900 something pages. I have it downloaded here. I was skimming through it. I didn't read the whole thing. I'm not gonna lie. I skimmed through it, and I didn't see anything bad. It was literally like restoring government or restoring the United States to its original founding concepts. So, getting rid of all these bloated agencies, the bureaucracy, reducing our national debt, incorporating tariffs. We're seeing a lot of it happening right now. And so, excuse me. So, to say that, that's a bad thing, it lets me know a couple of things about the American people. One, that you have a dependency mentality on having a bigger government and not wanting to express your freedoms and liberties as a citizen, as a sovereign citizen of the United States. That tells me that. The second thing it tells me is that you actually don't understand how the original design and founding concepts of the United States was conceived, or how it was perceived to be. So it tells me, like I said, it tells me a couple of things. But nonetheless, this is where we are. A government shutdown right now in the throes, and as I was discussing on last night's show with Pastor David Lowery, let the truth be told, that the Democrats are trying to pawn this off on Republicans, and we have to remember that when it comes to a fiscal bills, fiscally related bills, budgets and stuff like that, you have to have at least 60 or more, or 60 members, at least 60 members in the Senate to pass that bill. Simple majority in the House, 60 members in the Senate. And the Democrats, seven was needed to pass it, because 3 defected and said, yeah, we'll vote for this. But the rest of the Democrats, the rest of the 40 that takes it down to 44 Democrats, said, no, we're not doing that. We're not playing that game. And so here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are. This is a Democrat shutdown, all because they want $1.2 trillion in funding and a rollback of some of the provisions within the big beautiful bill that eliminated a lot of the BS that the Biden administration had implemented when it came to illegal immigrants in this country getting health care. They're trying to roll this back and implement this. We're trying to reduce money. We're trying to reduce debt. They want to add to it. And so this is the fight. And Republicans are like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. We're not playing that game. So give us the ball, put the ball in our court, in the White House, and you want to shut down the government? We're going to shut down the government by firing every damn body. How about that? and this is where we at, folks. So this is what that's why I was having this conversation with Mark Mix about, is the idea of, because of this government shutdown, the propensity of the government, the White House, and the OMB going through it systemically, and colloquially firing and laying off almost half of the federal government. So don't be surprised that agencies and bureaucracies that you're used to dealing with no longer exist come next week or so. And now you're like, oh my God, what is going on? I can't get. No, you're gonna be okay. Trust me, you're gonna be okay, because now they have to implement systems that make you, as a citizen, responsible for your life without the government intervention, which I would love to see. So, with that, folks, I do have to get up out of here. I do have a doctor's appointment to get to. So, be safe out there. Have fun. Enjoy your weekend. I hope you all have a blessed weekend and a quiet weekend, because the government shut down. So, I know for some it's like, you're not funny, Randy. But it's funny to me. It's hilarious. Especially the memes that the president's throwing out there. Him and J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance. Him and the president, them two. They've been having me crack up the last couple of days. But anyways, folks, all right, I'm going to talk to y'all later. Be safe. God bless. And I'll holler at y'all soon. Ciao, ciao. I hope you enjoyed today's program. You can follow, like, share, subscribe on Spotify, Substack, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, and your news. And also, you can download Let the Truth Be Told app on your favorite streaming platforms, such as Fire Stick, Apple TV, and Roku. Take care. God bless.